Before I turn it over to each of the panelists to introduce themselves and tell their story, I want to see if anyone here can chime in. One of the focal points of our webinar today, we've asked everyone to speak on the spirit of Ubuntu. And could any of our scholars or other panelists just briefly explain what the spirit of Ubuntu is for people that might not be familiar?
Can I go?
Yes, please.
Yeah. All right. For me, I understand Ubuntu to be sort of the principle of humanity, which sort of lives across African countries. There's actually one quote I think that sort of says it all. It says, "If you wanna go fast, go alone. If you wanna go far, go together." I think that is what that quote itself entails the concept of Ubuntu. We exist because of other people. I am because you are. I think that's basically what Ubuntu is.
Perfect and very inspiring for framing how we will do everything today in our talk and in the work we'll continue to do. So first, let's move on to Pat Dolan. Pat, let's start with you, and you can tell us a bit about empathy, what it's all about. How does it fit into the context of COVID and youth and civil societies? Why is it important?
We're in this kind of absolutely surreal situation in the world, not just in the US, Ireland, or in South Africa. It's something that is affecting everybody globally. And one of the things that has kind of emerged already, one of the positive messages that has emerged around the crisis has been the outbreak of humanity as opposed to the outbreak of a horrible virus disease. And I think one of the things that we see within that outbreak of humanity is the fact that empathy has become almost like a key word that has been repeatedly used in many states around the world, not least manifesting itself in acts of kindness and humanity between people. In particular, and relevant to this webinar 3, the role of youth and how young people have played their part, not just by demonstrating passive empathy, by staying away from other people and isolate themselves in case they run the risk of infecting other people in their communities, but also by, before lockdown, the generous acts they've done, and you're going to hear more about that later. But one thing that strikes me as we kind of go into what in Ireland is something like week 9 of our experience of COVID-19 is that empathy can wax and wane. And I think we had the initial waxing, like a moon, where people very quickly got into the stride of supporting others, family, community, older people in our communities. But over time, that level of support can wane, and you get tiredness. And one of the things about empathy is that it's not just a sudden burst effect. It's a more kind of longer term or multiple effect. And as we heard, in terms of our keyword for this webinar, you can go far together. And two of the ways we know that empathy gets played out by youth is helping others without personal reward is a great example of empathy. Not doing it for the sake of any recognition, but doing it purely on human instinct. And then, as is really the case with empathy and the fear of, let's be honest, the fear of people we love and know getting the disease or even dying from the disease, and particularly vulnerable people we know, it is very emotionally evocative. It's an emotionally evocative situation. And we do know that empathy kicks in for people when you face an emotionally evocative situation. But as crucial as that is, two of the key things for me is that we've got to remember that COVID-19 needs us to think about the idea of the other as not just being somebody who is of a different age group or a different class or whatever, or a different gender, but also it's people from other states right around the world. This is a global pandemic. It needs global empathy and global leadership. And we shouldn't just be seeing it as something that we relate to within our own families and our own community or our own schools or our own cities or our own rural areas, but right around the world. And that's what really emerges, this kind of social ecological understanding of empathy. I suppose an important part of understanding empathy as we go forward is that really both with Generation Z, that age group of Generation Z and millennials, there will be a huge burden on them going into the future. And I don't just mean the burden of worry about employment or worry about basic financial sustenance, but also the worry about that we are losing elders in our communities. We are facing the stress of worry that maybe this might be the only time we have a pandemic like this, or we get another strain of it or another round of it. But also from the point of view that the Generation Z and the millennials are really where the future leadership, not just political leadership, but social leadership will be. We will need to depend on it. And for me, and I think in the work that you and I have been doing, Mark, and in a way, the whole idea of starting off this conversation as a public conversation is to think about the fact of how do we make empathy an everyday staple part of our emotional diet. And really, the process that we will go into today is to learn that in the context of friends that are around this conversation.
That's great, Pat. Thanks very much. And thanks for pointing out the, the role there of the millennial generation and Generation Z. For people that are watching here, you may not be aware, but more than half of the planet is under age 25. And that percentage is incredibly high within Africa. As we respond to this crisis and rebuild afterwards, it's going to fall on them. And I think their positive leadership is going to be critical. So thanks again, Pat. That's absolutely great. Now let's turn to Uketsi. If you could tell us a bit about your experiences, the challenges that students are facing in South Africa. There's a whole load of things from fear and uncertainty to how we're learning to all the challenges we have. So maybe you could talk about that for a second.
Particularly studying at the University of Cape Town, doing my second year, and we recently just migrated to online learning from the 20th of April. I like to first start by saying, although as much as all the students want to continue with their learning and commence with the teaching, it is really not the most viable option for everyone at the moment. We all know that South Africa is rooted with a lot of inequalities, whereby facilitating these online programs in a way that is equal for everyone is completely impossible, because South Africa is rooted with a lot of disparities. We've got different socioeconomic backgrounds as students, and it comes with a lot of problems. I mean, for example, there's not every student has a device to actually go on with the online learning, which is what the universities have been doing. Not every student has a device, and has also other layers to that. For those that have a device, not everyone has data. Although the universities have actually come up with this, or have actually gotten into an agreement with some of the cellular networks to actually zero rate some of their learning resources. Not everyone that is able to get that also has network coverage or network connection. So, but people that come from the marginalized communities, like the rural areas, the townships, whereby they're unable to sort of connect to the internet and continue with their learning. So I think those are some of the issues that have been brought to our foreground by this COVID-19. And it extends beyond that. It extends beyond those technical issues. There's a lot of social issues that come with online learning. When everyone's home becomes a conducive area for learning. And we've got learners that come from homes whereby but being at home means that they have to take on some certain responsibilities that they cannot practically avoid. And then that means they have to take time from their online learning. For example, I was fortunate enough to be on a scholarship whereby they could organize a place for me to sort of continue with my online learning, but that is not the case for the many South African students that are out there. It has become, they've been left behind by this movement or this implementation of online learning. And those are some of the issues that have been raised by COVID-19 amongst the students.
We've been dealing with much of that too, as we've been moving to different forms of teaching and learning. You're right. I mean, one of the things that we've seen quite a bit is that many people just simply don't have access to computers or other things, or the idea that, in many households we have multiple people that are going to school, and who gets access to the one device if we have one. Maybe you could just tell me briefly too, Ketsi, about how's the process of learning been? I always find that it's a very interactive thing. We learn as much from our peers as we do from professors and others. The sense of isolation and being cut off from people, how's that affecting things for you?
It's very difficult because, I mean, for myself, I used to help quite a lot of students while I was at university, and that is physical help. But now we have to sort of try and do everything through the phone, and is very difficult. And then in terms of the isolation, it brings on certain sort of psychological effects, and it sort of perpetuates mental illness. There's mental health issues that come with being isolated from the rest of the student group, and it's very difficult for us to actually go. For some people, it's an easy adjustment, but not for the others. So with this online learning, it has become very difficult, especially with the isolation in place. And not every student at the moment is currently surviving, and many students are actually held back by this whole process. So it's quite difficult.
No, I'd agree, and I think one of the most important parts of the whole learning process is having that support among fellow students and friends. As we lose that, or if that's restricted now, it makes things much more difficult. Listen, thank you for that, and I'm sure we'll come back to that in the question and answer. For now, let's move on to Adelaide. How is it being a new graduate? You're a recent graduate in in-demand program, and what's life like these days, Adelaide?
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me. Now, being a graduate at this moment in time, it's a bittersweet moment because it's just the joy of finishing your degree and looking forward to the next step. Only to find out that we have this epidemic now, everything to be shut down, and it's truly stressful, especially in a country like ours. Just when we look at the stats of unemployment that were taken last year, if you look at the unemployment rate, it's actually at 29.1%. And if we look at the youth, it's 58.1%. And just looking at those numbers, those are varying, and those were numbers before the epidemic actually started. So obviously now those numbers have increased significantly, and it's a great disadvantage. So it's really hard actually finding employment during this time, because I know with myself, I had certain interviews lined up, but they had to be cancelled because there's a huge level of uncertainty that comes with this epidemic, because now companies are a bit skeptical in hiring because they're trying to see where this thing is going to go. We don't know, and especially with the economy being closed, everything is just at a standstill. Another issue is that now everything like online, Moeketsi did touch on it. Data is a very huge problem in a country like ours. Having to do your job applications online can be very expensive. And during this time, money is not coming in as it would normally would. So it's to an extent where I just do online applications during the night because data is much cheaper at night as compared to during the day. But yeah, it's just difficult.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's stressful enough to be seeking a job after graduation and everything else, but then as you throw this in here, that amount of stress and everything else, financial stress, worry stress, all sorts of things trickle into it. And now we're hitting 8 weeks, and the way that can snowball and become more and more of a problem. stress-wise and everything else is just massive. So thank you for that. And again, I'm sure there'll be many questions related to that. So now, if we could move on here, next I'd like to talk to Nule, and I can only imagine how teaching has been impacted for you. If it's not bad enough that our teaching has all been changed and has become more difficult and challenging. Oh, she offline? Okay. What we can do is, what I'll do is I'll move over to Halette, and when she comes back on, we can connect with her. If that's all right. So Halette, we can get to you now. What's your experience been with the Make a Difference Leadership Foundation? How has it been impacted with this whole COVID crisis, pandemic? You've done so much great work in so many different ways, and empathy has been a major part of your mission. How are you adapting and adjusting, and what's life like? See, no one wants to talk to me. We'll come back to them. The next person we could talk to is Alan Cairns. Now, Alan, you've been working in humanitarian and international development for quite some time now. Can you tell us about your experiences and the needs and the way that humanitarian responses to crisis can take place? You've been involved in lots of different settings, from South Africa to Zambia to elsewhere, and how you've made change happen and what's gone on there.
Yeah, Mark, thank you. I suppose the one thing that I'm intrigued by, that I'm kind of keen to really explore, is, when an emergency happens, as Pat says, there's an outbreak of humanity or an explosion in the generosity of human spirit, empathy, acts of kindness. People don't care in an emergency, from my experience in several emergency zones and disaster zones, and now in this global one, is, people just jump in and help. They just dive in and help, no matter what race, color, creed, culture, country, religion you come from. They just dive in and help. It's an innate human trait, it's a deep down human trait, just to dive in and help. And now it's brilliant to see globally this huge explosion of humanity and generosity of human spirit. But I'm very keen to try, and I've set up a new movement launching soon called Warriors for Humanity, and we're very keen to, all the other emergencies are quite specific and local and to a certain area, but this is a good first kind of one that we've experienced that's really impacted everybody all over the world. So everyone's talking about a new norm, how is it going to change the world after this prolonged experience? So we're very keen to explore platforms and ways to maintain, nourish, and to promote and this new culture, to kind of create a new culture legacy or a new norm where empathy and humanity is at the key of everything, or at the center of everything, and it's maintained. This outbreak of goodness is maintained. So does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no, it's great. And how do you think? Pat mentioned this before, that empathy ebbs and flows, and especially in a time like this where we now have been locked down for 6 to 8 weeks. Everyone's stressed and other things. How do you think you keep this going?
One idea we have is there's a men's shed movement for men who retire here in Ireland and all over the world, where people come together and it's a hope where you create a space for people to come together. And I think if you can create Warriors for Humanity hubs in each town and village or wherever, where you bring people together from different races, color, creeds, whatever, opinions, religions, and you break down the barriers. I've seen when I bring leaders to Africa on a leadership program I run, when people connect on a human level and forget everything else, magic happens. And if we can create platforms and opportunities for people to come together and do things that are of benefit to the local communities, barriers will be broken down. You get to know each other. Friendships are formed, and friendships and relationships are the bedrock of everything. And if we can create, people developing, meaningful, strong relationships, cross generations, cross cultures, I think that's where you have to start at the very basic.
No, that's great, and I agree completely. I mean, a lot of the work we've all done, that this work comes down to the local level, to the community level, and how do you build those relationships and keep those connections there, and the communications and everything else that you've been talking about. So we can move on here a bit. Have we been able to reconnect with Nubile and Andale? Oh, no, let's back. Good. Okay. Colette, if you could talk to us a bit, your experiences with the Make a Difference Leadership Foundation. They've impacted so many areas and so many people in so many ways, and empathy seems to have been a core of what you're doing. How does this come together now? How does this all come to play in terms of doing your regular work, but also dealing with the impacts of COVID-19?
Thanks, Mark. As a scholarship program, it's important to us to provide support to every individual in terms of what they need. We identify young people in South Africa with leadership potential, and even before COVID, what we've identified in our scholars is this understanding of Ubuntu, I am because we are. And what the young people who are talking with us tonight, what they didn't say is that they all are involved in movements or organizations whereby they support their peers from their communities who do not necessarily have the opportunities that they have in terms of a good education and access to online learning, education, etc. Muketsi has, during the COVID time, now started a WhatsApp group for our grade 12s, which is our final year high school students, and they're supporting them through WhatsApp, which is easier to connect with. I think what tonight has made clear is that our internet connections isn't that reliable either. What has been amazing to me is that despite the difficulty that even our scholars are going through, they still think about what is someone else going through. We have within the organization coordinators who mentor our scholars, who take responsibility for them. And since the country has gone into lockdown, today is week 7 of that, they have connected with their scholars on a weekly basis. Usually we do it every 2 weeks, but because of the isolation, because of the fact that we know a lot of young people that we support come from families who work in the informal sector, and with lockdown there is just no income in the home, we are checking in regularly to see how we can support, how we can help. And they are reaching out to us, just checking in. How are you doing? Are you coping fine? Or we miss you. I got lovely messages on Mother's Day even. And that for me speaks so much to what we see in young people in South Africa and in people in South Africa. We talk about hunger and just being, making sure that everyone has food. And then we're told, well, we actually ran out of money, but our neighbors have taken care of us and everyone brings something for us to eat. So it is really such a difficult time. But despite that, we are also seeing that understanding of gracious, generous kindness that is Ubuntu. Not only the understanding that what I do affects you and what you do affects me, but also the understanding that knowing that I want to make choices that is good for both of us. For us as a scholarship, the challenge has been that usually we provide support to our scholars in an environment that's conducive to learning, where we know there is food security in terms of being able to ensure that they have meals at boarding school or university residence, that they have a space where they can learn. That isn't the case now, and it has been interesting for us to find ways in which we can overcome that. But once again, our scholars work with us, and they find their own solutions. I've seen our young people being so innovative in terms of finding solutions, not sitting and saying, "Oh, this is hopeless. There's nothing I can do about this situation," but finding ways of making it work despite being in difficult circumstances. An example for me, when the school started with online learning, which is a very new concept, and for us being in the education field, it's concerning because we know there are many, many young people being left behind. Um, and so one of our scholars, she's turning 16 this year, sent her headmaster an email to raise concerns about online learning and the cost of data. And she acknowledged that she's part of a scholarship that will ensure that she has access to online learning. But she knows there are kids in her school who don't have that kind of financial support, and she's concerned about them. And that, to me, Mark, is, the spirit of Ubuntu is empathy, and is what I see in the young people of South Africa. We always think about how will this impact someone else, and what can I do to address that and maybe make it better for the person next to me.
That's great. Thanks so much, Alette. That's really kind of frames out the amazing work that the Make a Difference Leadership Foundation has done, and the impact it has beyond the individual scholars, and how it's building that capacity at so many levels. Let me check here. Has Nabila been able to connect back in? Oh, wonderful. Welcome back. Nabila, I'd love to ask your thoughts on all of this. I can only imagine how teaching has been impacted for you. It's an amazingly difficult job to begin with, and time consuming. And now you're doing that from a distance, which is even more complicated and tricky. On top of that, you're homeschooling your sister. How are you dealing with all this? What's life been like?
It has been quite daunting, I must say. The reality is we went from having a normal way of having school, a normal way of teaching, to a completely new world. At the moment, you're asking how I'm doing, and it's a juggle between trying to do enough, but realizing that there's only so much that we have access to because of the internet, etc. Having to teach my sister, I think for me is easy because teaching is my profession. But I think of the parents who are not trained to do any of the subjects, any of the languages, any of the work that comes with the school curriculum. And I've spoken to quite a few parents as well who have been struggling with that. And I mean, it's just a new space for all of us. There are children who are not being able to access those things. I think for me, luckily with us, in partnership with MAD, we're able to, we've got so many resources that we can make use of, which makes life easier, even for myself, for me to be able to teach my sister. So right now, we're all just trying to find a way, and really, my heart goes out to the people who are not in the education, field, who are all trying to scramble to see how they can teach the learners. And I mean, I'm myself, and as much as I'm a teacher, we are kind of a child-headed household. Well, it's better now that I'm older, but there are people who don't even have parents at all, who rely solely on, the neighbors around them, people who are trying to help them in whatever way. And I mean, that in itself just goes to show that every child is, to some extent, really having a challenge right now.
Oh, that's great, and it's incredibly insightful to what people are dealing with, and we've been experiencing many things too, where we have many children who are living with grandparents that may have been, disconnected from technology and don't know how to help with homeschooling, and all these sort of things. So it's become an incredibly complicated environment. But thanks so much for that insight. And there's already questions coming in about that, so we'll definitely ask your thoughts on others. So listen, thank you everyone for your contributions. You really shed some light on the complexity of COVID and how it's impacting children, youth, and families and communities in a range of settings in South Africa. We're about halfway through, but the good news is you've really sparked ideas and questions from our viewers, and we're being completely flooded with questions. So maybe we can spend a little bit of extra time to answer these or explore some of these. And these again, like other weeks, have come from all over the place. So one of the first ones here, and maybe anyone can jump in. But the first one here is from Michael in Dublin. This is the question is, why is empathy so important when we are facing much bigger problems like looking for work, rationing food, and other problems? Any thoughts on that one?
I can come in there, Mark, if you like. Yeah.
Sure.
I suppose it depends on how you look at the word empathy and how you think about it or how you conceptualize it. Because actually, empathy is the gateway to the bigger things. Even if we take the example that Halit gave of the issues in South Africa around food security. If we think about COVID-19 in Ireland, quite frankly, we have only begun to worry about food security when the crisis hit us, and there was a severe rush on toilet rolls and various things in supermarkets in Ireland, which was kind of joked about, but it was a really serious kind of attack on supermarkets by people who suddenly started worrying about flour and food security. And ironically, this is the way empathy actually works, because for the first time, we rightfully have started to value the people who stack our shelves. We started to see them as really important in our civic society and in our community. And in Ireland as well, it's ironic that, sometimes people are not as kind as they should be to people from other countries. And we have a very bad track record here, let's be honest about it, in relation to the scandal of direct provision in Ireland. And yet we know the majority of people that we badly need to work in our nursing homes, the majority of people who work in nursing homes come from other countries who are literally risking their own health and safety. So to what extent are we, if we think about the wider questions of job, economy, people who provide services, and yeah, they are big questions. But for me, the more important question is, how do we really put value? And I don't mean monetary value, I mean human value. And I would argue that empathy is actually like a currency. It's like the euro or like the dollar. It is a currency, and empathy is the currency that builds that gap between how we live our lives and how our hopes and our aspirations are actually lived out.
That's great. Any other thoughts on that one? We've got a bunch more to go through, so if you have anything pressing, just yell it out, please. Another one here from Madeleine in Paris. What she says is people in South Africa witnessed things much more worse than COVID-19. How does this shape the way you're responding and giving or receiving empathy? What can the world learn from South Africa?
I'd like to attend that one. Okay.
Yes, please.
I think we are a country which believes in Ubuntu, and Ubuntu goes so closely to empathy because Ubuntu is everyone is a person, or I am because you are. And in South Africa, we have learned to be so empathetic to a point where we even give, even if all of us are suffering. So I'll take from the little that I have and give to someone, so at least all of us have something. And I think it's true. There are people right now who, for example, education is the last thing on their minds because they can barely just have a meal. And we see how, neighbors are going out distributing the bit of food that they have. There are people who are, just sharing from the little, and that is really just so. So it ties into that principle of what Ubuntu is, because all of us can make it if everyone contributes whatever little of what they have, whether it's food, resources, anything really that just makes the other person just survive and get to the other side and hopefully make it out of this challenge of COVID-19.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much. And could I follow up on that to any of the scholars, or maybe let anyone here? How can we make the idea, the concept, the spirit of Ubuntu part of our daily lives? For everyone beyond here. I think it's been such a core aspect of dealing with challenges and problems. What's your advice for people taking that on all over the world?
Mark?
Yes.
All right.
Please.
So I think, every person actually has a story linked to someone else, right? If you look at our stories and the scholars from MED, we actually got to where we are today because there were people, MED, who decided to give back to us and actually for us to kind of live our dreams. So I think in that way, if people understand that you are where you are because of other people, then it would be easier for them to actually give their own time and actually give back to people, so that we as a nation and actually as the world become one, sure that we stay as one, because there are a lot of vulnerable people in our communities, and it is important that we make sure that we protect the vulnerable and the children, so that whenever this thing ends, all be safe and secure.
That's great. And I think that idea of embedding this in how we deal with each other. Other comments on that? I saw a few. Mobile, you saying you had something? Yeah.
All right. I think, can I add on to that over what Andile just said?
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Alette, do you have any thoughts?
I think Mokete wants to add something, Mark.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, please.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
All right. I think it's fine. It's all right. Just to add on to what Andile has just mentioned, I think it will also be important to actually understand that Ubuntu is not necessarily that complex. It's a simple principle that exists in part of our everyday lives. And I don't think it's as simple as an act of kindness on a daily basis. It doesn't have to be like one of those big things that people do. It's me holding the door for someone. It's me helping someone on the side of the road. Those are the basic parts of life that we live every day, and that constitutes to what the principle of Ubuntu is. And I think also, like, there is no me, there is no you. We all exist as us. And if you can understand that, then from there, I think Ubuntu can then become part of everyone's life.
That's great. Thanks so much. Okay, that'll give us plenty to go with there. Let's see a couple others coming in here. Maybe Alette, you can answer this one. Do you think communities will be different after all of this is done? Maybe they'll be more or less empathetic, more or less connected. This is a major challenge and conflict that's going to work on us for a while.
Mark, I think communities and the world already is different. We have It's complicated. On the one hand, we're burdened by the worries and knowing people you know might get sick. You might lose people you know. People you know are worried about losing their jobs or already don't have an income. At the same time, we are all really becoming aware of the value of human relationships, being together, the precious time you have, even being in lockdown with your family. It's I read somewhere that someone calls this the great pause, and I am hopeful that we know communities will be different. My hope is that we use this great pause to take what we've learned from this and remember the good and take that forward to carry the spirit of Ubuntu in South Africa, the idea of empathy. And I think Pat mentioned it's a currency. And my hope is that we will make empathy the new currency that's prevalent in the world after all of this.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, and we just had a great question following up on it. And the idea of Ubuntu is resonating around the world here, and people want to know more and talk about it. I guess for all of you, somebody asked here, is Mary asked here, is the relationship between, or what is the relationship between Ubuntu and empathy? Are they the same thing? Are they similar? Or are they different or overlapping? What do you think?
Mark?
Yes, please. Yep, go ahead.
Um, Empathy is embedded. Can you hear me? Oh,
So
now,
it's embedded and it's
yeah, I think it's a problem with the connection.
no worries. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. So what I was saying is embedded the spirit. There's a passage just one.
Okay, I think we're losing connection there. We'll come back to this one. Or if anyone else has anything to say there, we can do that. But I think we'll come back.
When Nelson Mandela authored the concept.
Okay, we'll come back. We'll come back in a minute here. Few other questions here. And maybe this one can go to Alan. One of the questions that came in from Richard is, can you tell us a little bit about Warriors for Humanity?
Yeah, I suppose Warriors for Humanity is a concept that I suppose I've worked in a lot of disaster zones and a lot of countries, and I've seen, as I said, the generosity of human spirit in the disaster zones, and I'm hugely passionate about how can we make the empathy the new currency. How can we foster, build that, and nourish it? And I suppose Warriors for Humanity is only it's been launched in the next few months, and it stemmed from my own little boy Ruan was critically ill in hospital, and I remember one day his lines got blocked, and I could do nothing. So the huge emergency team came in Manchester, and there's doctors from Asia, from America, from Israel, from Gaza, all working together with pure love to save a little boy's life. And at the same time, on the screen, the television, it was 2016, there was, remember that image of the little boy who died on the beach trying to escape Syria?
Yeah.
And I just said, my God, look, why isn't what's happening right in front of my face where people from different races, colours and creed were working to save my little boy. And then you see the same age little boy dead on a beach in the Mediterranean, wherever it was. And it just struck me like, how can we promote, nourish culture, this huge generosity of human spirit on a global scale? And that's what we're hoping to do. We're going to start off really small by creating Warriors for Humanity hubs in different villages where people really, really want to make a difference. People, want to help, but sometimes it can be difficult for them to get involved in different things. So we want to make it really local. So we're going to create Warriors for Humanity little hubs, a few pilot ones first, where we're going to bring people from different cultures together to do something meaningful for their own little village or their own little town. And that way, people will get to know each other, break down that barrier or that prejudice or that whatever, preconceived thought, perception they had of different people from different races or cultures. And when people, as I said, when I bring people to Zambia or Cape Town on leadership programs, when people meet at a human level, nothing else, magic happens. I've seen magic happen and great things happen. And I said, we hope, our plan is that, real meaningful human relationships are built, and they will be the bedrock for creating that ripple effect from village to village, from country to country, from wherever. Who knows where it'll go, but it's a real passion of mine because, as I said, I've worked in Africa, and I worked in many disaster zones, and I've just seen that outbreak of humanity. But why we want to create that. Warriors for Humanity is about creating that, are trying to promote that to become the new cultural norm, where empathy becomes, a really, really important currency. And we can see in all the great leadership, behavioral studies, empathy, all great leaders score very high on empathy. Because they understand, they bring people with them, they understand people, they get to know people, and they value people, and they value relationships, So that's a little bit about it. And just going back to, I've worked in Africa, I've learned huge amount from the African people and the African culture. And one clear example of what Ubuntu means to me is, and I think one of the scholars touched on it, we were working with the Home for Disabled Children in Zambia, and we brought in sweets one day, and I was an orphanage actually, and just a simple bag of jelly babies. And, in Ireland, one jelly baby they have to have 10 bags. But we gave out one sweet to each kid. And we noticed one kid took a tiny bite of her own jelly bean, and ran into the dormitory to give it to a sick child that wasn't out in the yard. So she shared her one jelly baby with her friend because she wanted her to have some. And that's what Ubuntu sums up for me for what I've taken it from the African people. We give in the Western world, we give what we don't need. In the African culture, they give what they need. They share the little bit they have with others. And if we could foster that spirit, the world would be a far better place. So that's just for me what it means.
That's great. And can I ask you, I had one other follow-up question? And we've got about 10 minutes left here, everyone. We're this discussion could go on for days. It's wonderful. There was a question here from Emily from Brussels, Alan, that I think builds on this thing here, your points and everything else. She said many people are critical of white Northern Hemisphere people coming to Africa to offer help. Very often, celebrities, whether it's Madonna or Bono or whoever. What are your thoughts? And I've heard this too within UNESCO that outside people don't understand the culture and the complexity and the history, and they don't help build local capacity. They just come in and out. I know you don't do that, but what's your thoughts on that?
Every organization is different, but all I can speak is from my own experience and what we've done in Africa is, empathy is going in and not telling people what to do. It's listening to what the community, they know what they need more than what we think. We often could go in and do this, do that, and we cause massive unintended harm and damage. But it's all about understanding what the locals want and what they need. So our approach, for example, we run a home for disabled children in Zambia. So our approach was, yes, we don't want them to become dependent on or this white saviorism or white superiority or complex, whatever. So what we've done is we've developed social enterprises around the home for disabled children that's been run by a wonderful nun. And so we've helped them develop, and they identified the need for several businesses to boost local jobs, to boost the local economy, and then the profits from those businesses goes back in to run the home for disabled children. So we along with the community have spent an awful lot of time developing local capacity, education, providing them with the opportunities then to get jobs and upskill. So we have a big guest house there, and we have a massive block making plant that they identified that there was a need or niche in the community for that. So now it's run all by locals, hundreds of local jobs, a huge boost to the local economy, and all the profits then are going back into running the home for disabled children. So it's self-sustainable. So it doesn't need us anymore. So it just needed that initial bit of support, of financial support, but also more importantly, human support in terms of building that local capacity and developing, because they are hugely, as you can see from the children or the scholars here, they're hugely talented, and people just need the opportunity and belief in themselves as well, because often they're used to seeing the NGOs come in and do everything for them. So it's just changing that mindset where they can do it for themselves. Mm-hmm. And by creating positive role models like the hugely talented scholars we have, they become the leaders then of their own community, and they help to drive their own community forward. So it's about investing in people more than investing in anything else.
Okay, great, thank you. Pat, could you chime in there? Because you and I have discussed this many times with UNESCO and UNICEF and other groups about how important it is to change the way things have done historically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we certainly have, Mark. It's something that comes up quite a bit. I mean, I would describe the difference between white saviorism, which is the term that's used for it, and empathy. White saviorism is sympathy. It's not actually empathy. Empathy is, as Alan described it, it's about an engagement with people as equals. It's not about some kind of white superiority. So that is the distinction. And I mean, if you look at this more broadly, like we sometimes people think about empathy as a feel-good, do-gooder thing, and it's the wrong way to think about it. It's not the right way to think about it at all. It's actually a much wider concept in that. Well, I'll give an example. If you think of the fact that what we're about to go through with COVID, I think will be on a par with what the UN was faced with when it was established at the end of World War II in 1945. In 1945, what were the two things that were the most, worldwide problems? Death and displacement. And in a way, it's a different form of displacement, but our human disconnectedness has become a displacement. And how we replace that will be a major challenge for us. My concern would be that we don't have white saviorism in the sense that we see it as about fixing other people. But if you look at the work that Alan has done, and I've been with Alan in Africa, and I've seen the work he's done and enabled with other people, which is totally co-produced and respectful. Or even think of the work of the Make a Difference Foundation, MAD, which Halit is leading up. That was where another sports star, Francois Pienaar, decided, what can I do in this famous conversation with Mandela, having won the World Cup, and he became a personal empathy enabler. And for me, it's about whether you're a boring academic like me, or whether you're a carpenter, or you're whatever you are in life. It's about what contribution can you bring to other people, and that really is going to be the most important way that empathy can be a currency.
That's great, Pat. Thanks. We've got time for one last question here, and I'd just like to bring this up, and this touches on some things that people have mentioned earlier. But it keeps coming back, and it's in a different way here. So this one comes from Noah in Florida. He says, we are experiencing many of the same challenges in America, but empathy is starting to give way to fear and frustration. Any advice on how we can get past the fear and frustration and get back to empathy? I'd like to ask our colleagues and scholars from South Africa, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, how do we get past how do we keep empathy alive in when we're dealing with fear and frustration and everything else?
Can I?
Maybe the ways
one
think.
more?
Yes, I was just going to call on you. Yes.
I think obviously everyone is terrified right now. I mean, we have never been in a situation where we are confronted with what's happening. But I think the one way to kind of overcome the fear is to really just see and ask people, try to get a feel of what everyone is feeling. I think the one thing that is scarier than anything else is when we start to feel that we're alone in what we're feeling. And it ties so well with empathy and Ubuntu because as soon as we reach out of ourselves and we try to connect with others, that is when fear kind of decreases and we get to actually expose ourselves to the fact that everyone is to some extent starting to become afraid. Everyone is trying to make sense of what's happening. And the great thing about it is there is going to come a solution bit by bit, and it just makes it more bearable if we're all kind of at a place where we embrace each other with kind words. I mean, I've been looking, Make a Difference Leadership Foundation, for example, had this whole series where they were thanking people. So many people are involved. Matter and Adventures. It's just that people that actually work with them to raise funds. And I think not just that, just encouragement and saying, we're all afraid. How can we help each other with social media, with whatever we can at this moment to kind of lift ourselves out and be more empathetic and show a spirit of Ubuntu even from the back of a screen or wherever life has us at this moment.
Maybe I can't think of a better way to end the conversation today. It's absolutely brilliant and perfect in terms of how we can move forward through all this and how we're all interconnected. And I agree with you completely that the more we show empathy, that we give it, the more it takes away from that fear and frustration that people have. So we're just about out of time. What I'd really encourage anyone who's listening, there's much more we can learn from all these panelists. Please email us, go to our webpages, everything else, and we can connect everyone to answer further questions. The amount of insight and experience on this group here is just simply staggering. So this takes us to the end of the talk today. Thank all of you so much for being part of it and for everything you did in contributing to this. We've got another great conversation coming up next Thursday. And one of the things I forgot to mention early on as I was introducing everyone, the other key partner we have in producing these is the Life Course Institute at NUI Galway. They're a key partner and they've helped frame a lot of this. And they'll be heavily involved in next week's discussion where we talk about the rights and challenges that people with disability are facing in the environment of COVID-19. So please make sure you tune in next week. Thanks everyone online for being here, and we're looking forward to seeing you next Thursday. Until then, be safe and be well, and we'll see you soon.